All right, what I'm going to be doing right now is going over briefly the amendments in the Constitution. Due to the fact that we had limited time to spend on it, I do want to give you these notes so that you can review them. I'm not going to expect for the exam detail. I do expect you to have some rudimentary knowledge of the amendments. Of course, you should know that the first 10 amendments are the Bill of Rights. That is pretty much an expected bit of information. So let's go over each amendment. We'll begin first with Amendment 1. The basic idea behind the amendment is number one, of freedom of religion. This prohibits the establishment of an official or exclusive church or sect. It also establishes the fact that you cannot eliminate the idea of religion, that people have a right to their religion as well. All right, freedom, second part of that is freedom of speech and press. The expectation to have those freedoms is fundamental to our press as well as to us. We expect to be able to, if we want to talk or be able to discuss whether we believe in what our government is doing, we should have those freedoms to be able to do that. There are limitations to freedom. They exist with regards to defamation of character, which would include slander and libel. Also, obscenity and certain forms of state censorship, which has to do with a wartime. Freedom of speech is more limited during wartime than it is during peacetime. Right, I'm not going to go into a great deal of discussion here. We will do that later, but you will be able to, if you want, to read further descriptions of defamation as well as obscenity. In addition to the First Amendment, you have the freedom of assembly and petition, which includes marching, picketing, and pamphleteering, which means handing out pamphlets. Amendment 2. This protects an individual's right to own and bear firearms and to maintain a state militia. Of course, this is heavily debated and will continue to be heavily debated as the issue of whether firearms that owned by individuals is really a protected right. Amendment 3. Soldiers may not be quartered in your home during times of peace. If war exists, then only as prescribed by law. It is an obsolete amendment, obviously, because we do have soldiers that are able to be quartered in different air bases and forts and things like that. Soldiers really do not need to be quartered in our home, but of course it has not been eliminated because you never know. All right, Amendment 4. This begins to really get into the issues of if you are an arrested person, what rights do you have? This focuses on search and seizure. So Amendment 4 relates to what is proper and what is accepted in terms of search and seizure. First of all, there must be a warrant by a neutral magistrate, and they are required for arrests and searches of persons' homes and other private places. You must have probable cause before you may ask for a warrant, and then it must be then supported by an oath that you in fact are telling the truth. Warrants must describe the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. So they are not given just willy-nilly by a judge. They must be there must be evidence or some sort of probable cause to support giving a warrant. Amendment 5 has to again do with this issue of should you become arrested, what are your rights? This establishes the need for a grand jury to indict a person for a crime except in cases involving the military. What they're meaning is a grand jury is available for those times when it may not be an obvious crime and yet there is evidence that exists. And so what they do is they present this evidence to the grand jury, and the jury will decide whether indeed there is enough evidence for a person to be arrested and then go to trial. The grand jury has the option of saying yes or no. But if they do agree, then you can be indicted for a crime, and then you can go to court for that. Except in cases involving military handles their own cases. It's called military court. This and a grand jury is not necessary there. Double jeopardy exists as part of this amendment. Government cannot place a person on trial again after they have been either acquitted or convicted. Self-incrimination, which is known as pleading the fifth. This is available in the prosecution of a case. It must establish, the prosecution of a case must establish guilt by independent evidence and not by extorted confession from the suspect. You can refuse to answer questions on the grounds you do not want to incriminate yourself. Voluntary confessions are permitted, but you cannot be forced to make a confession. This is known as due process of law, which requires the government to observe proper and traditional methods of depriving one of an important right, and that has to do with those that are listed above and those that will be listed in the Sixth Amendment. There are methods and traditions that have to be followed. If it's not followed, then you have the right to petition for an appeal and possibly have that court session eliminated. All right, eminent domain also exists in Amendment 5. This is when the government may seize property in use in public interest if it must pay the owner fair value. The basic idea here is if there is a need for some sort of public like Route 70, which was a public interest, the opportunity to build Route 70. If you happen to own land that would be in the line of Route 70, then you would have lost that land to the government, but the government has to pay for the value of the land. They cannot just seize it without paying for it first. Amendment 6. This basically establishes what happens within a trial. You have a right to a speedy and public trial. You have the right to an impartial jury within the state or district where the crime was committed. You have the right to be informed of the nature of your charges. You have the right to be confronted by the witnesses against you, and you have the right to compel witnesses on your behalf to appear and testify for you. Those are all specific rights that have been spelled out in the Amendment 6. Amendment 7, the right to a jury in a civil trial for anything over $20. From this, alternative methods were developed to keep many of these cases out of court because it was overwhelming to the court system. So there was negotiation, arbitration, and mediation. All three of these are non-court activated. Only one is absolutely binding, and that's arbitration. Okay. Amendment 8, Cruel and Unusual Punishment Clause. This established that neither bail nor punishments are to be unreasonably severe. Of course, this is also then the basis of which a lot of people protest the death penalty, and saying that is in and of itself is cruel and unusual. At this present time, the death penalty is not, by law, not considered cruel and unusual as long as it is lethal injection. Amendment 9. Just because a right is not spelled out in the Constitution doesn't mean that the government can take that right, but its protections have to be found elsewhere in the Constitution. So specifically, it's limiting the government from controlling all aspects of your life. The government can only be involved as long as that has been spelled out in the Constitution. Amendment 10, the federal government is the recipient of these constitutionally delegated powers. What is not delegated remains with the states or the people. Right? This establishes that the states and the people have rights, that the federal government is not all powerful. Amendment 11, states can be sued only in state court. Amendment 12, Congress has enacted a statute providing that if the vote for president and vice president within a state is not certified by a governor under his seal, it shall not be counted unless both houses of Congress concur. Now, Amendment 13 is established in 1865 to abolish slavery entirely. Congress proposed this amendment. It gives Congress the authority to enforce the amendment by legislation. Using this amendment, Congress has legislated against slavery-like conditions such as peonage. Right? This establishes the right of Congress to eliminate anything that looks like slavery. Right? Amendment 14, 1868. This really spells out some issues that were left somewhat vague. It is 3 years after the Amendment 13. Section 1, all persons born or naturalized have the same rights, meaning all persons, African Americans in particular, were born, most were born here in the country. They have the right as a citizen. No state can make or enforce any law which denies these rights, and due process of law must be available to any person. So any sort of crime, there must be due process. Due process must be exist. Section 2. All persons 21 years of age and citizens of the U.S. have the right to vote unless they have participated in the rebellion or other crimes. Specifically what they're talking about here, rebellion, they're talking about the Civil War. Southern soldiers, anyone who participated in the rebellion, that might be those who participated in the government, were not permitted to vote. However, this establishes the right of the African Americans to vote. They have the right to vote. I'm not going to worry about Dred Scott right now. Section 3. No person shall be a senator or representative, president or vice president, or hold any office, civil or military, if they engaged in insurrection or rebellion or given aid or comfort to the enemies of the U.S., specifically targeting anyone who participated, any Southerner who participated in the Civil War. I should change that. Anyone who was a member of the Confederate Army. There were some Northerners who were members of the Confederate Army. They would not be permitted to hold any office. Section 4. Public debt, which included debts incurred for payment of pensions and bounties for services in suppressing the insurrection. It allowed Northern soldiers to receive pensions. It, however, next says public debt will not include any claim or loss as a result of the rebellion or insurrection against the U.S. In other words, Southerners or anyone who participated as part of the Confederacy would not be included. They would not be able to apply for pensions or bounties. All right. Amendment 15, 1870. Now, 5 years later, designed to protect the right of African Americans to vote. This is the foundation of the Voting Rights of the Voting Right Act of 1965. So, the amendment exists that was reaffirmed by the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Look at your dates. 95 years later, and it is still an issue. Okay, I'm going to stop there, and I want you to refer then to the PowerPoint that has to do with civil rights. It, again, can be found in resources under Unit 2.